Hello, young illustrators. My name is Robert Young, and I'm an illustrator, designer, fine artist, and educator. And today I'm going to talk about the whole point of being a commercial artist, and that's getting paid. I do want to preface this with a reminder that the world of illustration and commercial art in general is massive and varied. It's not a great idea to take any one person's advice as some sort of objective, universal truth that applies to every facet of the job equally. What I'm going to talk about is mostly based on my experiences and the experiences of other working artists that I know. So I encourage you, as always, to seek out as much information as possible from other illustrators, animators, designers, and artists to create a system that's going to work for your specific needs in your specific industry, and even in your specific niche of your specific industry. So, before you get paid, you have to get a job. So in the previous lecture, I talked about various ways of trying to find work and finding avenues to getting new work, contacting art directors. I've talked about social media in the past, getting your work in front of other people so that maybe they hire you. But now we're going to talk about what happens when that email comes in and someone wants to work with you. They want to commission you for illustration or animation or design or whatever. So the first thing is you're going to want to read the email very carefully. What is it exactly that you're doing? What are they asking you for? How long do you have to do it? How much is it going to pay? Any sort of instructions that they might have for you. Then you're going to want to reread the email more carefully. Go back through it again, write down, take notes. What kind of questions do you have? But be very sure about all the information in the email. I know even now when I get emails from new clients, my first instinct is that I'm just really psyched and I'm like super excited and I just want to start working and drawing and solving the problem. And that's not a great habit to have. And there have been times where I missed something or I made a mistake because I got kind of too excited to just start working on the job. But in this instance, we're talking about getting paid, and so you're going to want to make sure that all of the communication is very clear, and you want to make sure that you're being really communicative. So you're going to want to be as communicative as possible, and that's going to cut down, hopefully we have few, if any, misunderstandings. Don't wait until things are screwed up or you're falling behind schedule to raise a concern or ask a question. This is going to make it harder for you to get paid. It's also going to make it harder for you to maybe get that second or third or recurring jobs from this client, or for them to recommend you to another client or another department or a friend of theirs. A lot of art directors have art director friends. This is also going to be the part where if there is any room to negotiate your rate, you're going to want to negotiate your rate. So understand that your work has value. Your skills took years to develop, and if you went to school to learn those skills, then you also spent a lot of money on them. Even if what you're doing now feels like it comes really easy to you, understand that all of that time spent honing those skills is worth money. Advocate for yourself. Obviously, the client is seeking those skills because they need you to do what you do. And if you're a hobbyist, that's fine. If it's a bit of extra income but not your main focus in life, that's fine too. But understand that for many, this is not a hobby, and our profession deserves to be taken seriously, deserves to be valued, and we deserve to be compensated appropriately. And it's also okay to turn down a job if it's not right for you or if you don't have time, but also if it doesn't pay well enough, if it doesn't pay what the job is worth. Starting out, when you get those first few jobs, sometimes it can be really tempting to do work for a lot less money than you really need to get by. But whether or not people take that job, that's going to be up to them personally. But it's okay to turn down those jobs. The time you would have spent working for substandard pay, I think, is much better spent making new personal work, attracting new and better clients, marketing yourself, redoing your website, maybe taking a class and building a new skill, all kinds of things. So, when you're looking at that rate, if they have offered you a rate, is that standard? Is it a standard rate? You should have some idea of how long your work takes you, and then it's just doing some simple math to figure out what the hourly pay would be for that. But also what is standard for the industry. There's places that you can find that stuff out online sometimes. There's the Graphic Artists Guild Handbook of Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. There's also a lot of people that, on their Twitter, on Instagram, whatever, they'll talk about it. Pay transparency has been a big force in the last few years in the creative industries because it is really important. Without pay transparency, you've got, people potentially taking advantage of younger clients, or younger illustrators, illustrators from historically marginalized groups, paying people differently based on gender, sexual preference, all sorts of things. So really cool Twitter and Instagram and website that's come up just this year is lightbox.info, litebox.info. And what they're doing for pay transparency, I think, is really important. So you can also talk to other illustrators. Anytime that anybody has asked me what a job paid, I have no problem telling them. And it's a thing that I talk about in class. Like, I want to be as transparent as possible. Not everybody's going to be like that. There's, people have different reasons for kind of not wanting to be super open with different information. I don't personally think that it's super helpful for the industry, for the health of the industry on the whole, to always do that, but to each their own. So, the worst you can do is ask, and, maybe they just say no or whatever. So make sure also, when you're looking at that rate or you're trying to come up with your own rate, that you're taking all aspects into consideration. Not just how long is it going to take you to do the final piece, but any expenses that you may have, the time that it takes to do research and gather references or take your own references, the amount of time that it takes to sketch, the amount of time for revisions, for communicating with the client, and your final time on the final piece. One really important thing with the rate too is to not lowball. So if you're lowballing or undercutting other illustrators, one, it's not really a great look. It's kind of a pretty gross practice. But the other thing is that when you're undercutting other illustrators, either through malice or through a low sense of self-worth or naivety, it's a race to the bottom that harms all of us. So eventually you're coming back around and you're undercutting yourself. You're undercutting that lowball that you gave months ago. People will use that lowballing to try to lowball other illustrators. So don't do that. Unless you want to, I guess. It's your life. So in part of this communication, you should also be asking pertinent questions. So that can be questions about the assignment itself, questions about the pay, if it's a job that has royalties, whatever. hopefully a lot of this information is going to be in those initial emails, but they're not always. Sometimes you have to ask. I get stuff all the time where, it's got the rate in there, but they don't tell me when they need it by, or they don't tell me, what exactly they're using it for, because that can change depending on what kind of rights they're wanting, or what sort of usage fees you're going to have to factor in. So know what is expected of you and your client. So then you're going to have some different contract scenarios. So either you're going to be the one responsible for making a contract, the client is going to be the one who's going to give you a contract, or there is no formal contract. So depending on the industry, depending on the client, depending on all kinds of factors, one of those three things is going to happen. So for the scenario where the client's going to send you a contract, then a lot of the work's been done for you. You read over the contract, you decide whether or not you're going to sign it. It's important to remember that you can ask for changes on the contract. If it's a bad contract, or if it's signing away rights to your work that you don't want to sign away, or that you don't feel like the fee is good enough for, or if there's something in there about that's too far reaching for rights, or owns too much of your work, too much of your time, if there's a non-compete or something that you don't want to sign, you can always try to make suggestions. So again, if you're being professional and you're being communicative, there's no reason why you can't ask why something's in a contract, or ask for something to be changed slightly. I've heard stories, it's never happened to me personally, but I've heard tons of stories of people where, they're looking at the contract and it's asking for full, complete ownership of work. And when the illustrator said hey, can we change this part? The client said oh, sorry, that's just, we didn't mean to put that in there. That's just a boilerplate contract template. So it happens. You should still have your own contract. In general, you should know how a contract works and have your own, in case you get jobs from people that don't have contracts ready. I do a fair amount of work with people who don't really hire illustrators that often, if ever. And so they almost never have a contract. They're not used to having to sign a contract either. So, so I have to have my own. And in having my own, it has made me a little bit better of understanding the different things that can go into a contract, so that when I'm looking at a client-provided contract, it makes a little bit more sense, and I can, navigate it a little bit better and make suggestions. So, again, if the contract is coming from the client, you can make suggestions, but a lot of the work is done. That's kind of a separate situation. It's a little bit more straightforward. So, and it's going to change a lot industry to industry. So let's move on to if you're supplying the contract. So the paperwork part of it, you don't have to write these all up from scratch out of your imagination. So you can find examples of business forms that meet your needs and are used by people in your specific industry or market. The Graphic Artists Guild Handbook of Pricing and Ethical Guidelines that I mentioned a little bit earlier is a good resource for that. Also, a book called Business and Legal Forms for Illustrators. And there's also a ton of websites. Do some Googling, you can find things. Illustrator Neil Schwab has a website called Business of Illustration that's amazing. There's tons of information on there, tax information, different scenarios, contracts, great stuff. So my contract that I'm going to kind of talk about is kind of both an estimate and a contract in one form. So that's the scenario that I'm going to talk about for contracts. You can have different estimates and contracts, that's fine too, but for the people that I work for, and also I tend to do jobs that have a short turnaround for deadlines, it's just easier than sending an estimate, having the estimate approved, then sending a contract and having the contract approved. So I try to minimize the amount of paperwork that my clients have to do. Some of them too they're not as familiar with the process of hiring an illustrator, so I don't want to scare people with extraneous forms and extra work, or I don't want them to think that I'm kind of like trying to take advantage of them, like I'm going to own their business after they sign my form. So there is a part at the beginning of my estimate that basically states that if the client approves work to go ahead, that the estimate form essentially becomes the contract, and the all the paragraphs of the estimate would just be rolled over into the contract. So that's really helpful, I found, for me. So there's some stuff that should be in a contract that's really important. One, what is the job? So be descriptive. If the job is just described as artwork, that is really vague. Versus if the job is described as 1-2 color design for t-shirts, that's very specific. So that kind of protects you if they decide, if they are just buying whole artwork that they can use for whatever they want, then fine. Like maybe color artwork or a more descriptive version of artwork, depending on what you're doing, can be useful. Also, maybe artwork is fine. But if it is 1-2 color design for t-shirts, then that's what they're buying. So it's a place to, and it'll kind of be reiterated later in the usage rights, but it's a place that says, okay, that's what this is for. So if somebody buys artwork for t-shirts and then the t-shirts sell out immediately and there's demand to put it on coasters and black velvet paintings and flags and car wraps and rugs and stuff, then you can go back and renegotiate the contract. Like, it's a little bit of a different job at that point. So if you aren't descriptive, then you could unintentionally sell more of your rights or end up doing more work than what you're being paid for. So also, what rights are you selling and what are you retaining? My kind of boilerplate contract just sort of states that everything that's not explicitly detailed remains the ownership of the artist. But if someone is paying for full ownership of work, then I can increase my fee and they can have full ownership. Or if it's work for hire or whatever, there are many different scenarios. Or if they want to, if they're printing in the United States and Europe, that might change. So what exactly are you selling and what are you retaining? That should be in there somewhere. What are the applicable deadlines? So I have a part that just says, from getting the okay for sketches, this is how long it'll take until you get sketches. And I think I have it at like 7 days or something in my boilerplate contract template. So then they know what to expect, and I know how long I have. And this is a thing that really protects both of us. Also, if you're working on a really big, complicated project that's going to take months or years, you can have more information in there. So, either calendar dates or just month timelines or whatever. But that should be in the contract. Also, what is the fee? Obviously, very, very important. If there's nothing about how much you're being paid in the contract, then they probably don't have to pay you. So what's the fee? How many revisions are they paying for? So early in my career, I made the mistake of leaving that sort of stuff off of a contract, or just not bringing it up in the initial talks, when someone's commissioning me. And you can get stuck in revision hell where people just are wanting change after change after change after change and dragging things on for months. So depending on the job, I will decide, and the fee, I will decide how many revisions people get at the sketch phase, at the final phase, and that then tells them, this is what you're getting, this is what you're paying for. For this amount of money, you get X, Y, and Z services, which is not just the final work, it's also, how much time I'm spending on research and photo references, and whether or not you get to have the original artwork if you're a person that works traditionally. I don't work traditionally, so it doesn't really matter. There is no original traditional artwork. But I'll limit revisions to 2 or 3, somewhere in there. This can also be a point where, if someone wants to pay you less than what you're quoting them for your work, one thing that I've done in the past is say, like, well, okay, for less money, rather than, throwing the job away, for less money, I can do the same thing, but there are no revisions. So you can kind of maneuver things around to negotiate with your client that way. Permissions, releases, and hold harmless. So some sort of like cover your ass language. You want to have something in there that says that you're not liable for what this person does with it. So just basic stuff that you're going to find. It's not something that I would try to write out of the top of my head. Again, mine is from the business and legal forms for Illustrators, and I've just sort of modified the basic template. But you don't want to get sued because you did something for a client and then that client used it in a way that they shouldn't have or weren't allowed to. That's important. Also super important, having a kill fee or a cancellation fee. What that is kind of points where if the client says, you know what, never mind, or if the project falls through, or for whatever reason the job is canceled, depending on where it's canceled in the process, you've detailed how much you get paid for that. So you don't want to not have a kill fee and have it go, 99% of the way through the job and then go like, well, okay, never mind, we're not going to do it, and then try not to pay you. The percentage of the payment that you get is going to depend on a ton of factors. I do a lot of short work for kind of low dollar amounts, in the few hundreds of dollars a job, that only take me a couple hours. So, that's going to be different kill fee wise than if I'm working on something that took me 18 months. Also, I like to, when I'm talking to clients, again, especially because I have clients who don't, hire illustrators very often, I like to just say cancellation fee, because to me, kill fee sounds kind of aggressive. But in the industry, people just call it a kill fee. You're also going to want to know, if you're going to have any expenses, like let's say you're doing a mural or something. If you're getting paid $1,000 to do a mural, well, how big is it? Are you also supplying your paint and scaffolding or ladders or helpers or rollers or tarps? For a lot of the work that I do, there are no expenses, so or very few expenses. So it's not something that's in my boilerplate contract, but it is something that you would need to be aware of depending on what kind of work you're doing. You should also have information in there about the payment. When is it due? If you're taking a check, who is the check made out to you? But when is it due? If you don't have a due date, and what happens if the payment is late, then again, people they could just not pay you. So mine is just within 30 days of the receipt of final artwork. As soon as they get my final artwork, they have 30 days to pay me. This scenario could change. It could be 30 days, could be 60 days, 90 days. And it's really, what you're comfortable with, and also a little bit what's typical in the industry or for that kind of work. But I would say the sooner the better. So 30 days for me is pretty standard. If it's a really big payment, are the payments done in installments? Do you get paid anything in advance? Going back to the idea of a job that takes 18 months, if you're working 18 months on something and you're not getting paid until 30 days after it's done, that's a long time to go without getting paid. So depending on the dollar amount and, again, kind of norms in the industry that you're working in, there are different ways that payments can be metered out. So you just should have an idea of what that is, and that should be in your contract. So, and then also signatures. So, if a contract isn't signed, then it's not really very good. There is, technically the idea of a verbal agreement, but if you have to prove these things in court, I wouldn't rely on stuff like that. Usually you need a very large amount of proof and lots of receipts, all of the communication, all of that stuff. So make sure that it is signed, or it's not really doing you any good. So after that, and after you've done the work, you're going to give them an invoice. So the invoice should be, again, pretty specific about what the work is, how long they have to pay, what sort of penalty there is if the payment is late. And that's going to depend on you and what the client agrees to, what might be typical in the industry, and the type of job, the size of the payment, all of that stuff. But be specific, keep track of your invoices, have an invoice. If you're working for a client that provides their own contract, then they might have a specific invoicing system. You also might have to send like a W-9. You might get back a 1099. Different sort of tax fees. I've done a payment portal for clients. I've had clients just hand me cash or Venmo me, all kinds of stuff. So back to those contract scenarios, that third contract scenario is that there is no formal contract. So a lot of the times when I've done editorial work, there's not been a formal contract. There's been an email. I've agreed to the email. That's kind of what has taken place of the contract. Legally, it's binding. Luckily, I've never had to test something like that. But there are times when there might just not be a client. For editorial, it happens a lot, or a contract, sorry. For editorial, it happens a lot because the turnarounds are so short. So if I've only got, 24, 48 hours to get a job done, people just don't have time to mess around with sending a contract and then revising the contract and then signing the contract and sending it back and all of that stuff. So, what happens if you don't get paid? Again, this is something that you want to avoid by all means. Hopefully, if you've done all the communication, if you have language in your contract about what happens if they don't pay, even just having a contract worded the way that a legal document is worded, that can show you as a person who's taking their job seriously. So, if you're like, yeah, dude, whatever, like, I don't know, you can pay me whenever, like $20, $30, like, cool. Maybe someone's going to go like, yeah, I'm not going to pay this kid $20. Like, I'm just not going to, like, I've already got the work. I'm just not going to just not going to pay them. But if you have a contract that they signed and it says, this is what happens if you don't pay, this is what rights you're buying, all of that stuff, I think people are going to be a lot less likely to try to stiff you on payment. But maybe the payment is late. So if the payment is late, resend the invoice, remind the client. That updated invoice should reflect any late fees, penalties, any of that stuff as was dictated in the contract. If you didn't have that stuff, it's going to be a lot harder to say like, oh, well, okay, I know I didn't say anything about a fee, but now you have to pay a 5% late fee for every month or something. It's also going to be hard to prove that legally if you have to go that route. So you can repeat this step as many times as you like, or until you feel the need to move on to the next step. But eventually you're going to want to get paid. So if it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or if they've just stopped returning emails or something like that, then you might have to move on. And the next step would be to be more assertive. Calling, sending more invoices, threatening legal action, really, trying to get a hold of them in different ways, calling different people inside the organization, kind of being annoying to a degree, being kind of a pest. I've had people be a little bit late, and usually all it takes is a little reminder, and a little bit of a late fee for them to kind of get on board and get me paid. I've had people who accidentally sent me a check for the wrong amount, and really all it took was me going, hey, I appreciate the payment. There was just a little bit of an issue. It's not what we agreed upon in the invoice, so if you could please send the remainder. And then they do. I don't know. I don't know if they were trying to roll me or trying to get by with something. I don't really have time to think about that, so I'm gonna assume that it was just a simple mistake. But if I didn't say anything, if I was kind of too timid or afraid, then they're probably not going to realize it, and then just out of the kindness of their heart send me more money later. So be assertive. Be professional. Your payment's a little bit late. That's not quite an appropriate response to start dropping F-bombs on people or calling their moms or blasting them on Twitter quite yet. But if that stuff isn't working, then you can threaten legal action. Now, if you're not prepared for legal action, then you should probably not threaten legal action. But the type of legal action that you have is going to kind of depend on the job and the dollar amount and also where you live. So if it's a ton of money, then it's going to be something that is probably outside of the realm of small claims court, and you'll have to have an actual lawyer, and that's a different process. If you do happen to have a lawyer, if you're getting to a point where you're making a lot of money, you're getting a lot of jobs, maybe you've had to deal with some minor version of clients not paying before, it's not a bad idea. For me, I do not have a lawyer. I've luckily not had to sue anybody. It's never taken anything more than me maybe getting to the point where I more firmly remind someone to pay me, but I have no problem being a pain in the ass and being assertive and sticking up for myself. So if you get a lawyer, then sometimes all it's going to take is that first communication from the lawyer to the client saying like, hey, we're going to sue you if you don't rectify this, for them to do it. If it's a smaller dollar amount, and again, this depends on where you live, it can be anywhere from $1,000 or $2,000 up to like maybe $10,000 for the upper limit of small claims court. But for smaller dollar amounts, small claims court might be an option for you. Again, depending on where you live, this is an entirely different scenario. So, somebody's experiences in California may not be the same as someone's experiences in Ohio or Indiana. So you need to know, you'll have to do research at this point to find out exactly what you need to do and how it's going to work and all of that stuff. If you do have to do this, make sure that you have documentation for everything. I don't really like talking on the phone with clients. If I can avoid it, I prefer to have an email because that is part of a paper trail. I don't want somebody to say something, or it could be, me saying something on a phone call and then forgetting that I said it. I don't have a great memory. So, I need to make sure everything's written down. If you have all that stuff, it's going to help your case. If you have if you don't have a contract, if you're trying to, prove that there was a verbal agreement, then that suddenly becomes much harder than if you have a signed contract, signed and dated contract from your client. If you haven't been specific and thorough in your business forms, if they aren't signed, if, they're too vague, you might lose your case. And then, you're going to have some court fees and you're still not going to have your money. So you need to know when it's not worth it and to walk away. So, if I do a job for somebody for $200 and they're not paying me, I'm probably not going to take them to small claims court. It's, all that time is money I could be working, time that I could be working. It's time that I could be learning a new skill, marketing myself, all sorts of stuff. So let's say you don't go the small claims court route, or you do and it doesn't pan out. You might publicly shame them. People have done this to varying effect. So one pretty popular story over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I think, was Tuesday Basson, who's a designer in Los Angeles, and a company called Zara effectively stole work from her. And when she kind of found out and asked them to not steal work from her, they basically said, "We're too big for anyone to believe that we would steal from you because you are unknown." So they did not care. They didn't take it seriously. None of that stuff. Tuesday eventually posted the letter that she sent to them and their communication back. And she had like 150,000 something Instagram followers at the time. This is also back when Instagram's timeline was chronological and you actually saw things that people posted that you followed, instead of how it is now where no one sees anything and the algorithm has screwed everything up. So she got a lot of eyes on that, and then other people saw it and said, "Hey, I checked this out and they stole work from me too." And it snowballed into this huge thing. And eventually they were forced to sort of somewhat correct their theft. But, if you've got 2 followers on Instagram, it may not work. So you can try it. That could also lead you to legal problems of your own if it's, a sort of libel suit, or backfiring in another way. It's a risk that maybe you don't want to take. Maybe it turns other clients off or from hiring you. I don't know. In a fair and just world, that wouldn't be the case, but you just never know. Internet optics are weird and super messed up. There's people who want to pick apart and overanalyze everything someone posts, or there's people that just want to punish somebody. They want to punish strangers on the internet. So you got to decide for yourself if it's worth it. Again, if it's not that much money, maybe you just walk away. Maybe you just try to take some kind of lesson from it. Obviously not work with that client again. It's not a thing that I've ever had to do. So, I have had to chase payment down, but I've always been paid. More of what I'm used to, or what sort of happened early in my career, was more along the lines of not getting paid a fair rate, which is kind of a different issue. Not to say that I haven't had bad clients and that I haven't had to move on from bad clients. So if you're giving up and moving on, sometimes that's the best thing for you, mentally, physically, even monetarily. And you kind of develop an ability to spot red flags and a greater ability to avoid bad clients based on those signs. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some things that I've noticed, some things that kind of spook me, or make me think like, well, maybe I don't want to work with this person, or things that from my experience have happened with clients that ended up being really horrible to work with for one way or one reason or another. Maybe they didn't pay me, maybe they tried to pay me less than we agreed, maybe they were just a pain in the ass, maybe it just was a really unpleasant process. So that's one of the great things about being a commercial artist and a freelancer, is that you have to do a lot more work, but you get to choose who you work with. So one of the big things, obviously, unwillingness to sign a contract. If somebody was asking me for a rate or something, and I sent them an estimate that needs to be signed or a contract, and they don't want to do it, then we're done. That's obviously a terrible idea. The contract protects both parties. There's no reason not to sign one unless you're trying to take advantage of somebody. I don't really get a good vibe when someone only wants to speak on the phone. Again, I want to have documentation of everything. I'm not going to record my phone calls, and I would then have to prove, even if I write down things that the client says on the phone, it's going to be a lot harder for me to prove that they said that if it comes down to it. So I also just don't like talking on the phone. It's 2020. We don't need to do that. Hearing things like, "Oh, I just like your style," and then asking for work that is obviously not in line with that style. I was commissioned for, and actually a few of these things came up in this scenario. I was commissioned to do a mural in Baltimore for this private business, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we just really like your style," which, if you've seen my work, is pretty cartoony. It's very graphic. It's very flat and textured, and I use a mono-weight line. There's some comic elements. There's some Mobius in there. There's some other stuff. And then, what they were asking for was effectively a trompe-l'oeil of fish. They wanted realistic fish, not just more realistic than what I normally do, but fish that would confuse people. They would look at it and think, that's a real fish on the wall. So, obviously there's something kind of weird there, because if they like my style and they're looking at my work and it's flat and graphic and cartooned and all of this stuff, and then they want me to do photorealism, that's a pretty big disconnect. So that was a big red flag for me. They also refused to sign the contract, so I just said, no. They also didn't want to pay for expenses. So, I think they only had $1,000 to spend or something, which for a mural is not very much. And they didn't want to provide paints or brushes, or it wasn't a tall mural, but even ladders and stuff. They were like, nope, that's on you. So, I'm not getting paid $1,000. I'm getting paid $1,000 minus a bunch of expenses. So there really wasn't anything good about that. job. So thankfully it didn't work out, and I was able to walk away from it without having done very much work. Wanting to be as informal as possible, or saying things like, "Oh, it's not a big deal. This should be easy for you. It shouldn't take you any time." You're the one that's going to have an idea of how long it should take for a private client. Now, even if it's like a pro client, even if it's a magazine or a newspaper or publishing company or somebody who's used to hiring illustrators, you're the one that is going to know how long it takes for you to do something. So, this is probably, again, more of a red flag for private clients, private commissions, maybe people that aren't used to it. But I've found that usually when people are telling me it shouldn't take very much time, the job that they're describing then actually does take a lot of time. And so they're trying to pay for an hour or two of work when something would actually take 10, 20, 30 hours. A lot of times they're not taking into consideration stuff like research and reference, sketching, planning, all of that stuff. That's why you're the artist. And that's why what you say should be the thing that holds more weight. Anytime that a client wants you to do work that effectively copies another artist's work, again, that's just a really crappy thing to do. So don't do that. But they probably know that they don't have the budget for that other artist or something. So they're trying to get that artist's work for cheap. That's not a situation that you want to be in. Even if they pay, that's not going to be a good experience for anybody. Obviously, if you're putting it in your portfolio or something, then it kind of looks like you just copied someone else's work. There's all sorts of moral and ethical dilemmas there. I think it's pretty cut and dry, but that would be a great big red flag if that came up. Also, if they want you to work for exposure or experience, or because it'll be great for your portfolio, massive red flag. Exposure and experience mean not money. So you can't pay your bills. Even if you're doing it as a hobby or something, even if this is side work, even if it's a lark, you deserve to be paid for work. Your labor belongs to you. So, don't give it away for free. It can be really tempting when you're starting out, or when you get, when it's like a really big client or somebody that you've always wanted to work for or something. But again, you're lowering everybody else's pay rate. You're underselling yourself. There's no reason to do it. If they want to pay based on the condition of the thing that you're doing work for selling well, that's a big red flag. You have no control over whether or not the thing sells well. So that's not your job. They need visual problem solving, and you are doing that. After that, if it's for a t-shirt for them that they're selling, well, if it doesn't sell, that could be for any number of factors. Maybe they're bad at selling stuff. Maybe the thing that they wanted is not something that people want to buy. Maybe they got it printed on cheap t-shirts. Maybe they're charging too much. Maybe they're selling it in the wrong market to the wrong audience. That doesn't have anything to do with you. It's not your job. It's not your responsibility. So, big red flag. And then finally, somebody that wants like a big discount rate or a bulk rate. Discounting services, which is what we're doing, unless you're selling the original painting, then it's just a service. You're selling rights to an image rather than a physical image itself. When you're doing that, it is not impossible. It becomes much more difficult to provide a bulk rate. So when you're selling goods at a store, you have the cost of something, and then you have what you're selling it for. So maybe, maybe this thing cost you $1.50 and you're selling it for $10. That's a pretty big markup. It happens sometimes. It depends on what the thing is and your own bulk rates and buy-in rates and distribution rates and contracts with your vendors and all sorts of stuff. But you're not buying things for $1.50 and then trying to sell them for $1.50, because that wouldn't make any sense. Clothing tends to have a huge markup, but high-end electronics tend to have a really small markup. So, sometimes you can have, if you buy multiples of this thing, you can get a bulk rate because we're selling more and still making well over what we need to make, but it's a bigger guaranteed sale, so we'll give you a little bit of a break. For services, you're charging based on how long something takes you, really. And, if I do one illustration and it takes me 4 hours, then doing 2 illustrations is going to take me 8 hours, and 3 is going to take me 12 hours. At no point does it become cheaper for me or quicker for me. So it gets a little trickier. It's not impossible. And everybody kind of has to make this decision for themselves. Obviously, if you're doing one illustration for $100 versus 10 illustrations for $900, $900 is better than having $100. But you're going to have to decide, what works for you in that scenario, based on the job, based on how long it's taking you, all of that stuff. If you're charging a really low base rate, base hourly rate, then you may not have a lot of room to play there while still making enough money to get by. So that's a pretty personal decision. Okay, finally, taxes. So taxes are confusing. I don't fully understand them. Luckily, my tax situations are not incredibly complicated. The more money you make from more different clients that are paying you in different ways, the more complicated this is going to get. So this is going to be a thing that you're going to want to research and fully understand for yourself based on what you actually need. But if you make more than about $400 a year, I think it is, you're going to have to pay taxes on freelance work. So you're going to want to keep track of all your documents, invoices, receipts, 1099s, any sort of tax forms that you're getting. You should know whether or not you can get back into a payment portal for a client that you worked on that used a payment portal. If it offers to send you an email copy of something or a receipt, get it, take advantage of that, save it in a couple different places, know where your files are, have a naming convention so that you can find them. This, obviously the more clients, the more different payments, the more difficult this is going to be. You will most likely spend more, or you're gonna have to pay more in taxes as a freelancer than you would working as an employee for a company. So it's part of the sacrifice. You're getting more freedom in your jobs. You're getting all of these other things, but usually you do have to pay more in taxes. So to keep on track and to keep on top of that, you can pay quarterly estimated taxes. This this keeps you from getting a surprise giant tax bill at the end of the year. You are basically estimating how much you're going to make, though. So if you pay too much quarterly, then you'll get a refund at the end of the year. And if you pay too little, then you'll still owe even more money at the end of the year. And a lot of this information, there's tax stuff for freelancers and specifically for illustrators all over the place. Again, Neil Schwab's website, which is honestly how I know everything that I know about taxes. Businessofillustration.com is amazing. It doesn't have to be just freelance illustrators either. It can be other types of freelancers. Anybody that uses 1099s or W-9s for tax forms might have information for this that can help you. Read up. Like, don't not have a tax plan. That's like the worst thing that you could do. I don't know how many stories I've heard where the end of somebody's first year making a bunch of money or more money than they're used to as a freelance illustrator, designer, animator, and then they're like, just destroyed by their tax bill at the end of the year. So another thing to think about and probably to have is a separate account for any business expenses and spending that you may have. Different things are tax write-offs for freelancers. So if you have to buy materials, if you're buying a Wacom or a laptop or scanner or whatever, books, research, office space, studio space, that sort of stuff, you can write it off. But you're going to want to be able to keep track of that really easily. So you can just have a completely different spending account for business expenses and keep track of all that stuff so that you can write some of it off and hopefully have not have as much taxes to pay. A really important thing when you're getting paid by a client, your income taxes are not coming out of that. It's just a raw payment. So it is then on you to make sure that you're taking out of that payment an appropriate amount of money to give to the government in taxes later. So on average, it's like 25 to 30%. So if you get a check for $100, take out $25 to $30, put it in a separate savings account, and keep track of it, because that money in that account is going to go to paying your taxes either quarterly or at the end of the year. Probably the best thing that you could do, especially if you're making enough money to afford it, is to use a tax preparer or to hire an accountant. So they're professionals. They know taxes. They know the tax law and forms better than you do. They'll be able to help you. You're obviously going to have to pay them, but it's better than being audited. It's better than, taking all of that money that you've worked so hard for, getting all of these jobs, and losing all of it, or putting yourself into a really bad financial position, not having enough money to pay for other expenses because you misunderstood how much taxes you were going to have to pay. Just use an accountant, use a tax preparation service, something like that. That's a big thing that I see given all the time. I've tried to understand taxes, and they're complicated, I think, probably for a reason. I don't think it's a thing that just everybody on the street is supposed to be able to understand. I think that might be by design. So that's getting paid. Thank you for hanging out and listening to and watching this. Thank you for listening to all these episodes. I really appreciate it. And for all the shares and likes and subscribes and all that. Thank you. I think coming up, the next lecture will be on business cards and mailers, and I'll have a lot of examples of business cards and leave behinds and postcards and stuff from illustrators, and that'll be fun and maybe a little bit more visual. So thank you again, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.